consider a lot and be fat at the end of the night. So we're going to be tying a platform of pattern favorable to swing approach, be it single or double hand. A tremendous pattern in the dark. Smaller variations of this could be toned down, as the profile of this bug is fantastically mimicking Schlapen. There's certainly a little bit of Whitlock look to this Schlapen. A little bit more glide, a hefty stinger, and a lot more wedge. This is a hang down where the action is the stack of the men, which engages the wedge to kind of dig and chuck and then fall back with that slackened post men tension or lack thereof. A tremendous pattern on scandies, especially tied smaller. On single-handed approaches, we've used this very well on just about every river we've tried it on. And we'll start that pattern up right now. It's called Beetlejuice, and we do that because it's got the striped tails. We're going to start with a shank here, 40 millimeter. We want to get that nice and solid. Give that a nice platform. We're going to take a number 1, 2, and again, this platform is based upon what you need it for. I've tied these patterns all the way down to like a size 6, which is great for the trout spey. Again, we're going to tie this in a pretty bold fashion just so it's a night pattern. I found that with the night patterns, having a fair amount of contrast in all parts of the pattern seem to bring as much or more attention than anything else. So contrasting these grizzlies and whatnot. Again, along the shank here, we'd like to use the spaces to gap. It'll hold your wire in nicely. And I do use a GSB so that I can really hum down on this wire and connect it. If I were using a 25 millimeters or a shorter shank, I might double back on this. I do believe that if you're going this many times across the shank, though, you're not going to have this slip, especially with these really solid tugs on that GSB. And I usually take this thing right into a position where I can fill that little gap on the shank to kind of take off just a little bit of that wall edge there. Again, this pattern, there's a lot of muddler inspiration here. The muddler minnow, way ahead of its time. It's a ruddered happening. With the mat, you could even say there's some zoo cougar influence, as there is a flank in here. We enforce it with the guinea fowl to make sure that paper airplane on top is very good. And then we give it a nice rudder in the back, and we leave this kind of little sassy stinger for underneath the fly, so that when they're doing that shark attack, and more often than not, you'll find that hook in the outside of the mandible, because when they turn away from it on that shark attack, they typically get that point right there in that mandible. We're going to take a couple of saddle feathers here. And I do like to kind of mix them up here. We've got a grizzly with a black. And that black is a great contrast on any of your night flies, just because it has a very strong silhouette influence. They can find it pretty easy out there. And the chartreuse just gives it that kind of that Beetlejuice look. And we want this just as long as that hook is. So we don't want this terribly long, this tail. We don't want it swimming so much as a good chuck and dig and then a fall back with a rudder. We've got rubber tails or rubber legs on this and whatnot. Come right here on top. Make sure I've got a nice line on that. Give that a really good snug. Center your stuff there. Yeah, 150 GSP or 100 GSP is best here. Limit the wraps and give them good snugs. Moving into that first stage of flash here, you want something, say, a little bit more lighter as I'll get darker as I go to the top. And we're using this just in a short capacity, so you don't need a ton, because we're just trying to cut that gap in that wire shank is all, and that's usually the space off. So come back here. Another good snug. I really like using GSP, not just buying it. Much like a good sink tip, there are uses that all of these really cool add-ons and fly fishing we have these days. Just a short little niche there, kind of covering either side. Then we're going to come in with our first stage of rubber leg. And again, we're going for contrast here, but I will say that hot pink and orange rubber legs at night really have a spot for me. They are proven for me. So rubber legs in the pink or orange fashion. We're going to come in here with some polar mixed with reflector, and this really is the bulk of the body here. This is not a lot of material, so this will be a very easy fly to cast. There is no weight. The approximate amount of SOLAREZ / head cement that we use probably gives it more weight than the rest of the, or any one material on here. But, and what we want to do here is kind of remember our spacing here. We have our body, we'll build up our shoulders, and then we'll have our head up here. So we've got a low amount of body signature back here with that fallback rubber leg effect. And then we build the shoulder, leave that good signature with that deer head that kind of gives the whole thing a motor. And again, we're going to try and limit that body material, because not a big fan of mass as I am mimicking mass. And this polar, or any good dubbing loop for that matter, will kind of give that effect. Get that first one nice and tight. Let's see if I can get that a little bit better. There we go. And again, we'll go usually about 4 wraps here to that first segment, which we'll have 2 of. And there's your 4th wrap there. Nice copper with a bronze reflector in there, just leaving that darkened signature with a little bit of poke and flash. And if anybody knows what a repel flash looks like underwater at night, this is probably getting into that realm. So we're trying to, just when they're in close, to have that little peekaboo there. Generally speaking, you want those fish to be coming up from under and behind this. And as you stack a mend, the fish will have to charge it to stay with it, because it jolts, because it forces them to kind of react quickly. And as it jolts, they move forward with their pedals, and then it immediately falls back right into their face, so it kind of forces that reaction. And that's kind of their job, to investigate most, consider a lot, and be fat at the end of the night. So you want to make sure that the offering is in a position where you can convert on those takes, which will be, anybody that's fished at night just understands that, in the daylight we beg these brown trout to do some pretty cool things. Before I move forward, second stage of hot rubber legs there. We're going to go again with a 4 wrap of the polar with the reflector flash. But if you force that fish to kind of react to the fly and then you feed it to them, versus try stripping it away and creating a chase, which is kind of going in the wrong direction. You don't want to chase so much as you want to tickle and pick a fight with right on spot. you don't want to try and get a chase going, because I believe that they're less likely to, number one, be in a position where you can visually know when to set the hook, versus feel him take it. You know, one of the bonuses to this pattern is a lot of my clients that I fish mice with at night, they have a tendency to be pretty wound up, especially after they've heard it a couple of times. Sounds like somebody throwing a tennis shoe at that rodent. You know, and their reaction is often based on that hearing part of it, where they hear the fish, third step of rubber and last. They hear that fish go, and it's like buck fever with a fly rod. They just pucker up, and you can almost see the pucker even in the dark. Those waders tighten right up, and they set too early because the fish has yet to actually go down with the fly. They've heard it break the water, and they end up setting too early. and a few fish are lost every summer in that. Again, kind of be open to your pattern choice here. I have yet to find a color that didn't work in the dark, so keep that in mind. But with the Beetlejuice, unlike the mouse, this bug is actually fishing in the film, and maybe a foot or two, depending on your leader lengths and presentation skills, below the surface. And while it's nudging there and the fish is maybe aggressive in its take, it's still below the surface, so you won't hear it as much as you'll feel it. And that really helps clients convert on attempts from fish, because they have to feel the take before they're lifting through with that surprise, which works out, because that's when it's time to do, when the line goes tight. And much like a swing take, you know. And there is just a hair more play than this in your standard swing, but no more different than like a sea trout or some type of Atlantic, maybe, in that respect, where you're giving some bob and weave to the swung presentated or swung fly. We're just going to give that a single wrap. We're just building that shoulder base right now. We got a little bit more rudder to build here. So one good wrap there, snip it. And you can see that shoulder we're talking about, that signature that's left in the water by anything that's just got that single spot. I don't like a lot of mass back here. I don't mind it up here. Again, you know, inspirations, the Whitlocks, the muddler, anybody that's ever fished at night, that when it's gotten tough, a muddler minnow just kind of picks locks. We're going to go here from our first wrap of Zonker into a pretty center staged flank of choice color there, whatever. And I usually match that up so I've got just a little bit of that flash kind of poking out that rear. So I'll trim that back. And I'll plant that dude right up in front. And I don't mind having a few of those fibers up there for extra support and grab. Make sure you get that right on top, because you want a nice paper airplane here underwater. There we go. And you should use your scissors there, by the way. Come back up here, clean that up. We can leave that little knot there, that's good. And then our second stage of flash, we're going to mix it up and kind of match up that tail just a bit here. We're going to do a little bit of this grizzly. And like I said, get creative here. You don't have to kind of stick with any one mold. We're just kind of breaking it up again for contrast and whatnot. And get a decent, you want that spread not around the hook so much as right up on top. Give that a good GSP snugging there so you don't get a lot of slip or movement. And I'll usually match that to that flash from before back there. We're going to come in here with the guinea fowl. This is a little bit of support and breakup in this color. And all we're looking to do is cover that flank. So you can be kind of tidy about it. And again, you can use some of that after shaft or whatnot just to kind of get that good center and grab on this. You can always clean up the forward in a second. Nice little pull there from the GSB to insist that gets into a good spot. And that one I'm going to use the scissors on. Again, you can kind of see where if you got into some really natural colors here, which I've done for some of these Schlapen variants, but you can really get fun with this as far as a Schlapen, because the forward body as a Schlapen is very thick up here and very limited back here with just limited tail action. Last stage of flash here, and with it being a night fly or a possible night fly, we're going to stay here with this little bit more of a night theme, a dark purple flash with some pretty good disco to it. A little cleaning there. And I have been accused of a little too much flash from time to time, and that might have been one of those instances. So I'm going to take off just a wee bit of that and come back in there. That's better. This can be just longer than the ones that you cut. You want that to kind of flap in the wind just a little bit more. Now we're going to take some black bunny here. I think I've got just enough here to do this. I'm going to post that right up on top, that extra shoulder build there. GSB that glue right down. And yeah, I could have used a longer piece here, but this will work. One wrap. And coming up and under here, there's that second wrap. We're going to do just that extra just to make sure that dark theme stays all the way. Again, you could get into some really cool stuff, you know, with the olives and the browns and the natural variants. And that's going to play just fine. Made that work just right. Give that a good snug down. So you can kind of see you've got your body here. Make sure you give that shank as much taunt as you can, because it's already trickier doing the shank spin here. And just so we've got a foundation here that we can always come back to, I'm going to give this a whip finish here and get this deer stuff ready. Oops, got around that thing, didn't I? There we go, try that one more time. Here's a good snug. There we go, nice tight there. We've gotten our body built. The undercarriage of this, I'll kind of show you when we're done here. Kind of get some sense here that these legs are really gonna, I mean, we're gonna snip them up, just kind of prune them so that they're a little bit more fashioned, but I mean, we don't have a lot of body. There's not a lot of, you know, mass here at all. So there's going to be a lot of movement. And what this hook undercarriage ends up doing is it acts like an anchor for this otherwise would-be wedge that may or may not, at this short of a distance, roll the fly. Having the hook in place and underneath, and then again pointing down, ensures that the anchor from underneath is there during its kind of fish through the water. So whenever you give it a wedge, the anchor of the hook underneath is helping take that heavy action from otherwise twisting it in the current and giving it a good anchor, otherwise exposing itself at the same time. Again, most fish attacks or Schlapen attacks, especially when they're close to the surface, are going to be from up and underneath this fly. So having that hook point there kind of ensures that the slash is recorded by at least a bump and often just a hookup. And that bump is still contact to the fly, so it, you know, they all deserve a point at some point. So we're going to build this head in such a way that we're not so big that it starts floating to the surface too much. We want this thing kind of neutrally buoyant right below the surface on, if you're single hand This might be a 7 to 9 foot leader, depending on the river that you're fishing. Again, a dark fly. The platform here, though, should be used and very much considered for any trout spey. Again, anytime that you can throw to the distance to the shallow bar, which often is the case when you're trout spey out west, you're trying to mosey into the deep trench, as it were. And in that, what you can do with this neutrally buoyant fly is not worry about your hook point so much until that point of engagement of tension in the line where that wedge really kind of starts to focus that little bit of depth. Especially upwards of 12 feet, you can insist that this fly will probably get 4 to 5 feet of water if, you know, that mend is right and you're getting a solid dig and a fallback solid dig. Those fish will move for this pattern too. Don't feel like you got to rub the bottom for it. But again, a terribly good trout spey option, not in these colors, obviously. This, again, is kind of a dark theme, and I haven't tied a color that hasn't been poked. I do believe a lot of it is just that contrast and signature near the surface, which is kind of their job to do when it's happening. We're going to start here with our first shoulder, and you can be semi-giving here with this shoulder. You want to have some amount of guard hair here because that's part of your signature, and really your only signature is the head of this fly. Again, the back end of this being so limited. And do yourself a favor, look into the Josh Varner deer, because he is doing some next level quality stuff I haven't seen since I was a kid, and consistent. It's not this pelt or that, it's the whole shooting match that he sent me was just all grade A deer. Okay, so we're threaded back up here. We're going to start with a kind of a light and purple here. Make sure you check out Dan's 1884 fly shop. He's going to be carrying some of the Varner here very soon. And again, the grade of this stuff is really next level. So those who are into tying any type of deer, Bufords, Dungeons, and you're looking for that prime guard hair, the one with the good spikes and the good, you know, it fills in nice. You don't get any of those bald tags, which is kind of cool. There we go. And we're going to come in here again, covering about that 2/3, 3/4 there. And 2 wraps there, get that good signature pull there, get a good spin. 3, 4, 5, and at 150 that should cover that. I like giving it a little snug. Move your collar around, kind of like a caddis. If you've ever done those little caddis collars where you want it kind of mostly on the top there, that's kind of what we're going for here. You can have that front spin just a little bit more. Give it a good snug there. And 3, 4, and that should cover that. Coming in with a big hunk of Varner black here. We're going to clean this up. We do want a good belly of black here because we're still staying on that dark theme here. Anything black and purple says, come look at me in the dark. Make sure you got a good level there. Find your mark, get a good press. Usually 2 wraps and then the good snug. 3, 4, 5. Good pulls on those. Can use your GSB. Kind of manipulate that around before you give it that final straw there. Gonna hold that back. Gotta have enough room for one more big stack here. There we go. Give that a little squeeze. And 1, 2, 3. There we go. Again, the material that you're spinning on here should be as much or more on top as anywhere else. You don't necessarily need this to come around to the bottom, because when this thing chucks, you don't want it to spin or encourage it to spin by having that material under the chin. By having it all on top, the bug always wants to write to that leveled, correct way, no matter how bad it chucks. Good cleanup there. Put this right out in front. There's a good spin. There we go. Use that thumb to go find that eye. Make sure everything's looking on the up and up there. Seems right. Give that a nice, go find that eye a little bit better. Careful now, because you are using a shank there. So it's a little bit more wobbly at 40 mil than 25. Clean that up. Just give your, crowding the eye is something I love doing. That means you use the whole hook. Give your bobbin a little spin there to tighten that thread up. There we go. Give it a really solid spin. We're going to turn that into a wire so we can give that a proper tug in there on that whip finish. Bury that in there. And one more for good measure. GSP is fun. We have a Beetlejuice built. Now we're going to cut that head up and make it work. Grab your standard cutting tool. We're going to take and make sure your vise is good and level for these exercises. Go in there and find that eye. And we can start pretty low on this scale. We really want this thing to knife in. And commit with that cut. That first one's the start of kind of all the good things there. Keep in mind that it should be flat on top. We are not looking here for a Madonna or a cougar or push fly. We are looking for something that would dig. I think I got to change my blade here. Let's see. That's doing okay. I get that question a lot, how many blades you go through. I can usually, as long as I'm not hitting the hooks, you can usually get a couple dozen out of each blade as long as you know when to flip it and when to use it for kind of that finishing when you go back and kind of proof them all. I'm going to flip that over and lose a lot of this chin. This is kind of, was all cosmetic down there, if you will. And we're going to clean that up. And do be careful. That shank has a tendency to expose the thread a little bit more so than when you're tying a drunk with the same style wedge. And there is a semi good cushion of material between you and ever getting to the hook. With this, because of that little shank turn back up in the front, you could nick it. So be careful on that chin in the beginning. Make sure that's nice and level. Getting that basic wedge form here. Ooh, let's get the flishy flash out of there. There we go. And over here. Right here you've got a basic wedge already, but we're going to clean this up now. And what we're trying to do is just make some sense of this and give this some really knifey edges. I usually start with the chin just to go find that little knot. And that gives me a good platform on how shallow that chin should be. Make sure that under mustache is clean. Nice and level there. You can kind of see that levelness. And then right here we're going to start kind of giving that wedge some real definition. Oh, that flash has really got a cowlick on it, doesn't it? There we go. And again, on this size hook, we're going to try and get this head big enough to get that good chuck and dip, but not so much that it's going to be floating to the surface every time we're done tugging on it too. You know, one can say when you're fishing confidence, there's a certain level of productivity in just fishing that confidence just because you're fishing the fly better or whatever. You know, I had a confidence and still have a confidence when I fish this fly at night that it's really selling subsurface where I can't know what's going on, unlike the surface bite where even if I don't get the fish, I can still hear him miss it or gulp it or slash at it or whatever the case in point. You know, with this, it's like, you know, braille with an octopus. You're feeling your way through the evening, and it really does lead to some good hookups. Again, if you're not too giddy when the happening occurs, then you're much better off than if you are kind of over tuned up for that night bite. Okay, we're getting close here. There we go. Let me clean this up a little with some scissors. And right here on the sides here, what I want some nice square edges to kind of give me this really boxy square wedge so that I can really get an eyeball on the imperfections. You know, because you want to think about these wedges almost like, you know, when you're fishing like a repeller or a crankbait. If that lip is off tune or malfunctioning or cracked or whatever the case in point, it's going to be a lot less of the movement you're looking for because it isn't. So when you are building these, build that with that in mind, that you're really trying to give this wedge a definition and direction so that it does kind of drive the rest of the fly. Even in just that pulse-like action of mend. That pulse action mend is, I mean, at night, wouldn't do nearly as much unless you're walking sculpins in the middle of the day. But at night, for bigger browns that are on the hunt, they will charge that pulse. Just being picky here. I don't like any guards in my collar. There we go. So what you've got here is your basic wedge, and we're just gonna smooth off that top so we got a nice planer board happening there. And right there, most time consuming part of the fly, hands down. Make sure your little understash is clean. And that's going to be good enough, because that dog's going to walk. Get all those guards out. No welcome guards. A little clean there. Okay, so this is your kind of one more snip here. What I like to do with these legs is you find that long part of the polar and the reflector flash. And I do like mixing those colors, just a little bit more depth to the pattern. And usually the top ones are pretty close to being okay, right up there by the head. And then as you go back, you want that rear one, the kind of the shortest. That kind of gives you a nice little spread there. And again, that fallback that these rubber legs have, like as it's going to dip forward, it's going to fall back. And that undercarriage and that profile, as you can kind of see here, very Schlapen-y. Again, there's no weight here. You can use a 20-pound too and even get a better. It's regardless, depending on the fish that you're hunting. But if you got a big enough hook on there, you could run that. But you can kind of see where it points at, and it's an undercarriage and very light, not much to it. Now we're going to start adding some cosmetics here. Get this guy back in the vise. Okay, take some super glue here. Make sure that bunny stays out of this equation. You can just tap one here. Boom. Tap one there. Boom. No hairs allowed. And you can grab these little eyes right here. Any sticky eye will do. And you do want to kind of semi-fill that gap up a little bit. So, and having a little bit of sparkle eye is no bad thing. I'll roll this guy around. See if I can do this a little bit more gracefully. And dropping him on right there. There we go. That was a lot better landing. And we're going to let that dry a second. And we can talk a little just before we kind of do the finishing touches here. Again, I really could recommend this for, I'd really like to see how the trout spey, guys. We've done it with steelhead and very small wedges where we can still run our sink tips with it. And it tracks really well, it really does. So I'm sure out west on a 3 to 6 weight rod versus throwing something with a big old set of barbells or just even a little bit of weight for that matter. This thing just has a lot more swim potential without throwing the weight. And that's slower medium water, which is where this one plays really nice. And again, some of those big fish don't always like to break the surface for prey, but they're willing to kill just about anything in the column. And this is that nice middle ground. And we'll talk about how it moves in just a second here as we finish up. Okay, I think that should be here. I'm going to give this one more cleanup and make sure those are glued. That feels pretty solid. Make sure all the legs are as they're supposed to be here. Head's in right place. Eyeballs cleaning up here just a little bit. And we're going to grab our SOLAREZ here. I like that medium thick for this. You could run a medium. I don't like the super hards just because you can crack them if you hit a rock or whatever else. But, you know, typically I like this kind of that medium with that lacquer, that little bit of shine on top, as just about every fish does have some shine on the top of their melon. Okay. We're going to take, and I've got to get just what's left of this bottle here. I think we're getting close to the end. Oh, I feel something there. There we go. And, you know, depending on how long you want it to last, you can kind of use that whole top end there for the whole gig. And I'll take and I'll dab this right up on top, take some of that, come on over here, kind of cover that eye. Hopefully that glue is set on that. There we go, and fill in that right there, a little bit on the top. Come over here, kind of cover the back of that eye. Just barely sticking on there, aren't you? Could have given that a second longer on the crazy glue. And we're going to do the bottom here. Make sure you kind of tuck your bunny back here. We don't want to get too much on the bunny so much as just on the head there. Okay, we've got that covered up on the bottom. Now we're going to get a little bit on top here. Just getting enough to kind of put a glaze on that. Very different doing that when it's on the vise versus the thing. We're going to take our plasma loon here. There we go. That should be locked up. Use your cure light right and you don't have any sticky or anything like that. So you can kind of see it's got some symmetry to that underflank. We've got a very Schlapen-esque. Oh, let me see if I can grab something a little bit more sturdy there. You can kind of see we've got that Schlapen-esque undercarriage there. Let me see if I can grab this on the tip there. How's that look? There we go. That's a little bit better. And again, this hook here acts as like an anchor. Again, this size of a head with this short of a body with this limited material would otherwise want to tip and over kind of crank this length of train. Unlike a D that has an articulation that otherwise whips the series behind that. This is detached. So yeah, I mean, the idea here is to have this bug when it's stacked, because just mood, it's going to be still digging and it's going to wobble a little bit just because it's got this little butter knife back here, a little of that kind of cougar-y flanking with some, so there's movement without it. However, as soon as you dart that thing off of a floating line, which is only right here but not below, you're going to get that forwarded wedge and it's going to get a ridiculous kick and wedge. But as soon as you relax it, it's going to fall back normal on that wedge. And as it backs up, I mean, this is kind of what they see, is this is kind of coming to them like this. And as that comes to them, that, again, they can turn off. But most fish that have given something chase, they want to get paid, especially at night. So if this sets off enough whistles on that fallback, you're going to get that. But that undercarriage is very simple. There's not much to it. And that stiffness will find that fish. Again, I get as many or more fish right in the mandible outside as I do anything else with this hook. We finished the Beetlejuice here. And yes, that's fun to do. And this fly will be up at the 1884 fly shop on display in the fly tying room there at the 1884. And yeah, he's going to Shanghai the bug and I can't even fish it. Yeah. That's happening. Perfect. That bug does look cool on camera, doesn't it, too?